Misunderstandings, that's how trouble begins. Even Abraham Lincoln, who tried so hard to be fair, misunderstood the Native Americans. We are not, as a race, so much disposed to fight and kill one another as our red brethren, said Lincoln. Read that again. Be sure you understand what Lincoln was saying. He made a statement during the bloody Civil War. It was one time he was not on target. What Lincoln was doing and what many of us seem to do. He was lumping a lot of people together and making a general statement all alike. Some have warring traditions, others peaceful ones. Siouxes are as different from Pueblo people as Swedes are from Turks.
Okay. Yeah, he's talking about, but Lincoln makes that statement during the Civil War when 600,000 Americans died by killing each other. So that's kind of funny that he's pointing out what savage the Native Americans are. Okay, all right, Seth.
Okay. That was part of the problem. The New Americans and the Native Americans were sharing the same land, but they didn't really know each other. They had different ways of living. Neither group wanted to change, and why should they? The problem was that these two ways of life were not compatible. That means they could exist together on the same land, and they both wanted that land. The Plains Indians were mostly hunters. The new settlers were mostly farmers and ranchers. Hunters and farmers have a hard time living together. Hunters need land free and uncultivated, so herds of buffalo and deer and antelope can move about. Farmers need land cleared of wild animals so their crops won't be trampled, eaten, and destroyed.
Okay, so think about it. Ranchers and farmers didn't get along. The Native Americans didn't get along with, especially the farmers, because the farmers, they're turning, when you cultivate land. Basically, what they're talking about is they're turning the grass under. Well, that's what the buffaloes eat. The ranchers didn't like it because they would fence off some of the land sometimes to try to keep the cattle from coming on and trampling their crops. So you got three parties here with three different interests in the land, and none of them really are sitting down. They don't particularly care for each other too much. All right, Leo.
Okay.
Can y'all see the people playing the little game? That's what they do during class now.
I think it's funny. Okay.
Yeah.
When Lewis and Clark explored the West, when was that? Vast herds of buffalo stretched as far as the eye could see. By 1865, there were still about 12 billion buffalo. One observer told of a herd moving about 15 miles an hour that was so big it took 5 days for the whole herd to pass them by. A few years later, the buffalo were just about all gone. They were hunted almost to extinction. Hunters felt like Buffalo Bill Cody led the charge, leaving herds where they fell. The land stank with the smell of dead buffalo. Then the plains, which had once vibrated with the sounds of animals, became quiet as a desert. But not for long. Cattle soon replaced the buffalo.
Okay, so the Indian, we've talked about this before. The Native Americans, when they killed the buffaloes, they took it just what they needed, and then they used all of it. Okay, the buffalo hunters came in, and they pretty much just wiped them out, and then just left them laying there, unfortunately, to rot. They didn't use any of it, not the meat, not the skin, the fur, nothing was used. They just came in and wiped them out, and of course, the Native Americans a little bit upset about that because their way of life is changing, and now you're taking away their food source, their what they used to build shelters, clothing, all of that. Okay? Anybody else want to read for us? All right, Rihanna.
Most Americans
are individuals and proud of it. But what was good for the individual farmers, or lumberman, or cattle rancher may not be good for a whole society. Native Americans knew that. The Indian culture was usually centered of the community, not the individual, but what is good for the whole community may be frustrating for some individuals. These are two different ways of organizing people in government. One way isn't better or worse than the other way. Each is just different and worthy of respect.
Okay? So in other words, if this lady who wrote this book said, why can't we just sit down and talk about it and try to figure out how? Well, when you got three different parties that far apart, it's going to be hard to get them to sit down and discuss anything that is going to result in a positive change, unfortunately. All right, anybody else? Anybody that hasn't read yet would like to read? Okay, Hart?
Are we at the abundance of the land? The abundance of the land turned into many Americans into wasters. There were so many buffalo and so many trees and so much land. It was hard to imagine an end to any of it. Most Americans are individualist and proud of it. But what is good for the individual farmer or lumberman or cattle rancher may not be good for a whole society. Native Americans knew that. The Indian cultures were usually centered on the community, not the individual. But what is good for the whole community may be frustrating for some individuals. These are two different ways of organizing people and governments. One way isn't better or worse than the other way. Each is just different and worthy of respect.
Okay, very good. Anybody else? You want to read, Julia? Okay.
The Indians of the plains didn't get much respect. They depended on buffalo meat for food and buffalo skins for clothing and shelter. And they were horrified to see the buffalo and the land wasted. That left them hungry, angry, and confused. Those Native American men and women who had once lived freely on the land now faced machines with guns, cannons, army troops, barbed wire, and diseases the newcomers brought with them. They fought these new enemies with all energy they had, but they didn't have a chance of winning.
Okay. So yeah, they're seeing their entire life being turned upside down. And you got to figure how hard that would be. It would be like at my age, you guys would adapt a lot quicker than someone my age would, okay? Someone my age, if my whole life got turned upside down and my way of life was going to change, I would have a hard time adapting to that. At 11 or 12, you guys could adapt quicker. You might not like it at first, but you could adapt a lot quicker. So you got to figure, these guys, their way of life is changing completely. Everything that they have known up to this point is kind of being taken away. So they're not real happy about this by any stretch. And you can't blame them. I don't think anybody would be happy about that. All right, Rihanna.
We got to better understand.
Sure.
To better understand what happened, it helps to realize that after the Civil War, there were many former soldiers who had learned during the war how to kill people. They were used to doing it and they didn't know quite what else to do. So they came to the West and killed Indians. Peaceful settlers who moved west to farm were often innocent victims of angry Indians. All that led to the intense hatreds and revenge raids on both sides. The Indians especially hated the iron horses, those roaring locomotives, which thundered across their hunting ground, filling the gun-toting sounds and settlers. The Native Americans weren't willing to give up their land and move onto the reservation. They were usually on poor land that was not good for growing crops. Would you be willing? They fought for their land and their way of life. Army troops sent west to control the Indians slaughtered them instead.
Okay. So at first they had guys, basically they were almost like missionaries that were paid, not missionaries, mercenaries, that were paid to go out and they became Indian fighters, but they were paid to go out and kill the Indians is what they were. And then of course the troops were sent out later to control them, but ended up slaughtering them. They would go in and sometimes wipe out women, children, older people, the whole bit. You know, again, not the prettiest time of our history, but you know, that is the way things happen. Have y'all noticed how Van has been flirting with you three ladies at home the entire class? And Leo, I thought he had fallen asleep there for a minute. He was just about to fall out of his chair. He was, or trying to get up inside of his desk. I wasn't sure what was going on there. Okay, all right. So, just let you know.
Why you
Yes,
should watch the video.
This is why you have to watch the videos, but can I read the
yes, you can read.
That's what I do. If I knew someone was watching, I'd be there.
I would
We
not
get
have
1,000 likes on this video.
I'm going to email your parents and have them watch.
Please like and subscribe. My parents just laughed.
The only good Indian is a dead Indian.
Please like
Stop talking, please. We are in class and we are reading.
The only good Indian is a dead Indian, said Philip Sheridan, who had been a Union general during the Civil War. His boss, William Tecumseh
Yep.
Sherman, seemed to agree. Sherman's middle name was that of a great Indian hero, but Sherman didn't brag about that fact. He was sometimes called Kump, but never Tecumseh. He talked about a final solution to the Indian problem. By that, Sherman meant their destruction. John Pope,
Yeah, you keep going.
John Pope, who had been head of the Union forces at the Second Battle of Bull Run and lost, announced that he would deal with the Sioux as maniacs or wild beasts, and by no means as people with whom treaties or compromises can be made. He tried his best to do that.
Okay, so you got Sherrington, who the only good Indian is a dead Indian, and his boss, Sherman, if you remember Sherman during the Civil War, was not the nicest of the Union generals by any stretch. He came through Georgia and pretty much destroyed all the crops, killed the livestock, burnt down farm homes, hung innocent people, burned Atlanta. I mean, he was pretty much a holy terror himself. So obviously he had if he didn't mind doing that to fellow Americans, he certainly wasn't going to have any problem wiping out the Native Americans. Okay? Yes, sir.
Can I read?
Yes.
In Colorado, Colonel John M. Chivington, a former minister, slaughtered over 150 Cheyenne who had gone to the governor for protection. Most were women and children. Chivington called it an act of duty to ourselves and civilization. About 1/4 of the armor's Western troops were black. The Indians called them buffalo soldiers because some had curly hair, like the buffalo. The men liked the name and used a buffalo as their emblem. Blacks were determined to be equal partners with whites in the American way of life. The Indians felt differently. Most had no desire to be partners. They wanted to be left alone and pursue their own way of life.
Okay?
Do you want me to read like this print right here?
Yeah, let me say something, then I'll let you read the rest of that. A lot of the blacks that went west were freedmen, and they ended up working on the railroad. The Buffalo soldiers were actually probably from up north, or had gone from the south to the north and fought for the Union Army, and then when the Civil War ended, they become federal troops. Okay, and of course they get sent west because when you're in the military, you go where your orders comes down, and you go where they tell you to go. You don't really have a whole lot of say-so in it. So that's how these guys ends up out, and they took it as a sense of pride when they were referred to as the Buffalo Hunters. They actually adapted that as their who they were. They were the Buffalo Hunter, and they were kind of proud of that, being that their unit name, if you would. Okay, go ahead.
The whites were trying to make the Indians give up their life and live like white men, go to farming, work hard, and do as they did. And the Indians did not know how to do that, and they did not want to. If the Indians had tried to make the whites live like them, the whites would have resisted. And it was the same way with many Indians. If the Indians wanted to go where they pleased, the Indians wanted to go where they pleased, and when they pleased, hunt game wherever they could find it, sell their furs to traders, and live as they could. Many of the white men often abused the Indians and treated them unkindly. Perhaps they had excuse, but the Indians did not think so. Many of the whites always seemed to say by their manner when they seemed to say by their manner when they saw an Indian, "I am much better than you." And the Indians did not like this. The Dakota did not believe they were better men in the world than they.
Yep. Yeah, these are proud people, and to be told that they're basically are savages, that they're unworthy, they take great offense to that. Oddly enough, isn't that weird that somebody would take offense to that? Yes, Caleb.
Oh, can I read the next part?
Yes.
The Indian Wars in the West, the hardest fought of them, lasted from the end of the Civil War until a final massacre of Indians in 1890 at a place called Wounded Knee. Could the land have been shared? It wouldn't have been easy. Where do you live? Who lived on your land 300 years ago? Would you share your home? What about homeless people today? How can we solve their problems? The Indian story should have been different. There could have been respect and honesty between the peoples. There could have been strong laws to prevent unfairness and brutality. There could have been more understanding. Even those like the Christian missionaries who went to help the Native Americans usually ended up destroying the tribes because they didn't respect the Native American cultures. The missionaries were arrogant without realizing it because they were sure their way of life was better than the Native Americans' way. They thought they were doing right when they tried to force Indians to live as they did. What would you have done?
Okay, so it is kind of weird if you think about it. We had a tendency, we went out, and because they didn't think the way that we thought they should think and all, even the missionaries had a hard time dealing with them instead of trying to understand their culture and working with them and things. So it was kind of a lose-lose situation going into this, okay? All right, I hope you enjoyed getting to see some of your classmates. And there's one right there. There's another one, and there's another one, and another one.
Peace out, girls. Peace out, girls. Like and subscribe.
All right.
I'll make a
Bye.
part 2.